When you bring them together, now remember, in a society, there exists the consumers, there exists the producers, both of them. They're part of the society. So from the society's social welfare perspective, this is the equilibrium. And at this equilibrium, the consumer and the producer surplus is basically at equilibrium. This is the consumer surplus. Area below the demand curve and above the market price. That's consumer surplus. And the producer surplus is the area above the supply curve and below the market price. And society ka surplus is the consumer and the producer collectively. Okay? If for some reason the quantity was restricted to Q1, okay, for some reason the quantity was restricted, and क्योंकि consumers are willing to pay a higher price, the prices went up to P1. Now what's going to happen? Well, this is what's going to happen now. Your new consumer surplus, क्योंकि the prices have gone up, so area above the price and below the demand curve, and this is your new consumer surplus, because remember, this quantity has reduced now, so you're not even producing QO to Q1. So the original consumer and producer surplus का जो ये area है, which is now not being produced, is a loss to the society. It's a dead weight loss. Nobody gets this anymore. Now, as far as the producer goes, area above the supply curve and below the market price, this all goes to the producers. Now, in this case, I have made an assumption that the prices have gone up and the quantity has reduced. Okay. In case of taxes, we're going to see something different. So we're just going to hold that thought for now. This is in a case when quantity has been reduced. Now, what's the social welfare? Well, society mein consumer surplus is this, producer surplus is that. So total consumer and producer surplus is this, and you have a deadweight loss. In the first scenario, you did not have the deadweight loss. So overall, the consumer and the producer surplus area was far greater than this case. So definitely the society is at a loss in our second case. How about in a third case? When the markets are forced to produce extra quantity, okay, and now unfortunately, the prices, we're forcing the prices to remain where they are, okay. That this is the case in which the producer is saying that Q1 quantity has to be consumed by the society. Producers have to produce Q1 quantity and consumers have to consume Q1 quantity at the equilibrium price. So what's going to happen in this case? The thing is, up till Q1 quantity, the market will have a good consumer surplus, okay, and a good producer surplus also. But this is only till QO. But since the markets are forced to consume more, like at Q1, so if you see over here, Q1 quantity ke liye, producers are willing and able to charge this price. But they have to charge this price. So this is a disadvantage. Their willingness is higher than what they are actually charging. So there is definitely a loss to producers here, because they wanted to charge a higher price, but they're forced to charge lower. Similarly, consumers are willing to pay this price, but they have to actually pay this much. So they are also at a disadvantage that they have to pay a slightly higher price for the good. Now, this is like one of those fundamental cases that you have to pay, right? So this is like a loss to consumer. So the way the total would work is that you have a green area of consumer surplus, and then you'll have to subtract this area. So let me give them notations. Okay. So now your new consumer surplus is A minus D, because there's a loss that you have to net for. And the producer surplus is B minus the C. तो ये जो B, D और C का region है, basically this is the deadweight loss which is created on this society by forcing them for the consumption purposes. It could be a vaccine that the government is forcing them to produce more. And so it could be like a vaccine case in which the government has said the vaccine prices will remain at PO and Q1 has to be produced. Okay. And the government has insisted and enforcing everyone to pay for it and get it somehow or the other. So for those consumers who were willing to pay a higher price for these vaccines up till Q1, they were willing to pay, but they actually had to pay just POK price. So there's a consumer surplus for that many consumers. Then there were some garib log who were saying that we can't really afford to pay. We want to pay this price for it. But the government since has said that the price has to be this and consumers are forced to consume it. Unfortunately, these people are at a disadvantage here. So this is a loss to the consumers in a way. So जिनको फायदा हुआ, A minus the D will give you the net effect on the consumers, which is definitely lower than area A only because you're subtracting B. Similarly, producers are producing Q1. Okay, the prices have been set to PO. They're at an advantage for these quantities. Producers has an advantage, but for this extra quantity, they wanted to charge a higher price, but they're forced to charge this lower price. And so the producers are losing for QO to Q1. So definitely B minus C gives a lesser region in terms of the society's welfare. Now, the government, in order to actually have this in place, the government interventions would include things like subsidies or self-production or consumers' demand to go up or something or the other. They'll come up with ways through which this problem can be sorted. But for now, in case of a free market situation in a mixed economy situation in which the government is forcing the price and the quantity, there is a loss that's coming about.